The only way the Atlanta Braves can meaningfully upgrade shortstop this offseason is by making a trade. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Monday, October 14th. Your home for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Look who's back. He's Christian Rauh. You can follow him on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh, R-A-U-H. You can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. We've dropped a couple pieces over the weekend, a 40-man roster outlook, an Arizona Fall League update. We've got another state of the position coming a little bit later this week, as well as a quick taste of some of the top free agents and how they've performed in Truist Park. Interesting little piece coming there. But Christian, I want to talk about the shortstops today. I was going to do this on Friday. The Braves wanted to fire some coaches instead, so we talked about that. I'm glad I was able to hold this for you because I think I need a second perspective on this. Atlanta Braves fans have had it with Orlando Arcia. He was an all-star last year, right? He was an all-star in 2023. His first half of the year was very good. But ever since then, Orlando Arcia has had significant struggles at the plate. To kind of first half last year, he batted .294 with a .769 OPS across 68 games. Should have played one more, honestly. But since then, in the second half, he slumped a little bit. He batted .235. So that's almost a 60-point drop in batting average. .235. Hit more home runs in the second half than the first. Hit 10 homers in the second half, 7 in the first. But this year, the bottom absolutely fell out. Orlando Arcia batted .218 with a .625 OPS in 157 games. Hit 17 home runs, yes, but struck out 128 times. And I think the big problem here is he already wasn't that good, but situationally, he's been even worse. And are Braves fans right to be frustrated with what Orlando Arcia did at the plate?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. There's been multiple times this season where you've gone to the league leaders and you've had to click the button to sort from the lowest to the highest to find Orlando Arcia's name. And usually it was the first one on that list. So, no, I think there's definitely easily rights to be concerned or be upset, be frustrated about Orlando Arcia and how he played at the plate this season. I do think that, I know we're going to get to it, that there's a lot of things with his defense to be happy about, but it's not as nice as he thought it was going to be.
Yeah. So to contextualize some of the issues for Orlando Arcia here, okay. -32 on run value for his
Oof.
offense,
Oh my
which
God.
is the first percentile in all of baseball. And this is a situation where you don't want to be first. You want to be 99th percentile because that means you're better than 99% of hitters. In this case, he is in the bottom 1% of all hitters in baseball. This is something, a 21.3% strikeout rate, 6.8% walk rate. That's a below average strikeout rate. MLB average is 22.4%. So he's not striking out a ton, and he's still one of, if not the worst hitters in all of baseball. And then to make this even more frustrating offensively, with runners in scoring position, Orlando Arcia batted .155 with an OPS of 400. Not that's not a 400 slugging. It's a 400 OPS. It's a 228 on base and a 172 slug. I talked about this in late September in the State of the Position article, but he literally, like, he didn't move the runner over. I think it was like 10 times total with runners in scoring position, like via sacrifice. Like, he didn't even execute the sacrifice that many times. And he struck out more than he got on base and executed the sacrifice put together. Like, he's been incredibly bad this season in that situation. Does the defense outweigh that offense, or are we expecting too much from Orlando Arcia?
Yeah, I think that right now, if we're looking at 2024 in hindsight, the defense was exactly what kept him on the roster. There's no doubt about it, as well as all the other injuries on this team
Mhm.
made this priority move down the list quite a bit. But the offense was dreadful. And having him at the bottom of the lineup, there was a couple of times he was in the middle of the lineup because there was some brief moments in the season post All-Star break where he was actually a pretty decent batter. And it was only for a very short period of time, but
Oh, yeah,
that got him out of
he had a 3-week stretch where he batted like 300. Like, it's situationally, he was good for 2 weeks.
yeah, I think this is what I'm referring to. I think it was like right
Yeah,
after
yeah,
the All-Star break, right?
yeah,
It
yeah.
was around the All-Star break. I can't remember if it was before or
It
after.
was right after.
But, for the most part, having him at the bottom of the lineup was a guaranteed out, and then you add that to the catching position that was usually right after him, which was a rough spot as well, which I know we're gonna get to later
That's
on in the
tomorrow's
week.
show. That's tomorrow's show,
Um,
yeah.
right, it's just, that was just not a great thing to have at the bottom of your lineup when you were already struggling offensively, when you had all these injuries to your team. I think it built up a lot worse. I think it made the situation of Lando Arcia look a lot worse, but I still think it's a glaring problem that needs to be addressed this offseason.
Yeah, and Alex Anthopoulos in that postseason, not postseason, and the debrief after the season was over, right? Him and Snit talking. He said that Orlando Arcia was not expected to carry the load. His job was to come in, bat ninth, play defense. And the fact that they had to put him in the 5 hole 16 times, they put him in the 6 hole 23 times. That was, in AA's words, and I'm paraphrasing here, that was a failure on his part to build enough depth where that had to happen. And I do think Alex is being a little bit harsh on himself. These injuries were a lot, I'm not going to say unprecedented, but they were a lot more significant than anybody could reasonably have prepared for. There comes to a point when you just can't stash a seventh potential major league replacement in AAA. You did everything you could in that regard. But this is something where Orlando Arcia's defense, I'm going to go on a limb and I'm going to say it's fine. I don't actually think it's amazing. He had a +3 run value, which was 71st percentile for all defenders. But when you look at Orlando Arcia by himself compared to other shortstops, he graded out 15th at shortstop. And I believe this is a minimum of 750 innings.
15th
Um,
doesn't sound very good if you're Orlando Arcia. If and what you are, you know, spoke upon to be on the team is because of your defense. You can't be the middle of the pack shortstop in the
yeah.
league if you're gonna bat like that. You
Oh,
can't. It just can't
correction.
happen.
Correction. Minimum 500 innings. He graded out 14th at 3 outs above average. But also, you have to remember run value, outs above average. A lot of those are rate stats. He had 1,300 defensive innings. He was among the league leaders. The only guy I see on this board with more defensive innings than Orlando Arcia is Willy Adames with 1406, and he was at a 0, by the way. He was not a positive defender. He just was not a negative defender. And Anthony Volpe, who was 1,416 innings and a +11 run value, and offensively was almost as bad as Orlando Arcia is. So, yes, defensively, he's fine, but I'd even argue he's not great. And when you dive into some of under the hood on the defense, right? Orlando's Arcia's speed is not good. He is a, what is it, 13th percentile sprint speed. His range grades out really well, 87th percentile in range. And it's because of Atlanta's defensive positioning is so good. And his kind of reactions and things are so good that he gets around not having great speed. But there's not the only red on his StatCast. The only red there is fielding run value and range. Everything else is at best in that gray that doesn't get into red until you break 60%. Like, he's not actually an amazing defender. He's an above average defender, but the emphasis on average. He's above average, and that's it. But the problem is, and I broke this down on an article called "State of the Shortstop Position" back in late September. There's not a lot of other good options on this roster.
No.
in the organization at all. Nacho Alvarez, we saw him a little bit. He went 3 for 30 across 8 games, 1 run, 10 strikeouts. All 3 hits were singles. He just doesn't look ready. His AAA numbers, it's a small sample. His AAA numbers, he was good in AAA. Again, small sample, it's like 60 something games, but he has a couple fundamental flaws that I worry are going to hold him back from being significantly better than Orlando Arcia, right? I think he would be a better offensive player from the perspective of making contact. His zone contact in AAA, 89.4% when I wrote the article in late September, which is close to elite, right? Like 90% contact in the zone is an elite number, and he's close to it in AAA. He chases less than MLB average, but his power, his 90th percentile exit velocity, is a few miles an hour below the MLB average. And Atlanta, as I talked about last week, Atlanta's a team that likes to hit strikes hard. Nacho Alvarez just doesn't really do that. He's not power deficient. He can get one out, but he's not a slugger. And if you put him in the lineup, it's going to be a different dynamic than Orlando Arcia whenever he's finally ready. I think we saw from that brief look last year, he wasn't ready. And I don't know if you can get him ready by the start of the season to be the starting shortstop on a World Series contending team. There's teams where Nacho Alvarez can step in and be their starting shortstop in March next year, right?
Yeah.
You can find teams that are hoping to make a wild card and things like that that you can put Nacho Alvarez in. That's not the type of player you can put in on a World Series aspiring team. And that's one of the issues here is there's no convenient internal upgrades. Everybody else is at best a future utility player who struggles with the bat, a Cal Conley, a Luke Waddell, or a lower level prospect that's years away, like Jose Perdomo and Boris Tavares. You just don't have any internal options here.
When you think about how we have viewed Orlando Arcia all season long, and I know that most of us will point towards him. He's out there because of his defense. Do you think it's really because what we're really focused on is his availability this year because of how all the injuries happening, Lindsay? Do you think the fact that he was available to play and yes, he was out there doing defensive things, great. +3, okay, fine, even though it's middle of the pack, and I still think that's a concern. But do you think the fact that he was available makes it a little bit more just okay? Yeah, that's why he was out there. But obviously, we have to replace that. But do you think that's why he was maybe just given the okay moving forward? The availability of having Orlando Arcia.
I think it was more so the fact that he was available and you didn't really have anybody else. Like you had to
Fair.
go grab Zach Short off of waivers. You played Luke Williams there a game or two. You played Gio Urshela there late in the season a game or two. You just didn't have a lot of other options at shortstop. Luis Guillorme did not work out there. They ended up moving on from him. And the issue here with trying to upgrade from Orlando Arcia is free agency. The free agency class doesn't have a lot of slam dunk options that are better than Orlando Arcia. We'll get into that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby, Christian Rauh. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Crosby Baseball. He's at Christian S. Rauh, R-A-U-H. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We also have a Facebook and an Instagram. You can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. Again, one of the things we're talking about in this show today is a piece I wrote back in late September, State of the Position, Shortstop. But looking at the free agency class at this position, it feels like exactly 2 everyday players at shortstop in this entire free agency class. Willy Adames, everybody wants Willy Adames. He batted 250 with 32 homers, 19 stolen bases, 110 RBI. Obviously, he's usually a plus defender. He struggled this year. I think some of that was just a fluke. I don't think he's declined at age 29. But I also don't think Atlanta's going to be able to pay for him. My expectation is that one, he declines a qualifying offer, so he'll cost you a draft pick if you sign him. And two, he's probably looking for the Dansby Swanson deal. 6 or 7 years, $177 million. And if you weren't willing to give that to Dansby Swanson, why do we expect you would give it to Willy Adames?
No, that's exactly how I feel too. I think Willy Adames is going to be out of the price range of the Atlanta Braves. I don't think that's going to be a bidding war that we're going to see AA get into. I just don't see that happening. I don't think that's going to be his priority when he gets to the offseason, spending all the money towards getting Willy Adames into a contract, just like you mentioned, that's going to rival Dansby Swanson, which I think is actually going to wind up being higher when it's all said and done. I
Yeah.
think he's going to wind up being a pretty,
Oh,
very expensive. I think he's going to be a very expensive player in this winter. He might be with the exception of Juan Soto, maybe another outfielder. I'm guessing probably second, third most expensive player this offseason.
I'm guessing it's probably Soto, Corbin Burns, and then
Yeah, I wasn't
maybe
thinking
not even
pitchers
Corbin
when I was
Burns.
talking.
Yeah, but fun fact by the way, mentioning Dansby, number one defender and outs above average this year, Dansby Swanson. Oh, sorry, at shortstop. But the other guy, the other everyday guy, is Ha-Seong Kim of the San Diego Padres. Just finished his age 28 season. Struggled with injury this year, only batted 233. Last year, when he was healthy, he batted 260, stole 38 bags, hit 17 home runs. He's another guy that might be a little more in your price range, but I still think he's going to get a qualifying offer. I still think he's going to sign probably a 4 or 5 year deal, and it's going to be probably, I'd say, $100 million. And so, with a team that feels like it has a limit, a salary limit of $22 million a year. Because again, no long-term deal signed under Alex Anthopoulos has been for more than $22 million in any year. Supposedly the Freddie Freeman proposal would have been over that. Supposedly the Aaron Nola proposal would have been over that. Josh Donaldson's 1 year deal in 2019 was for $23 million. But nobody right now, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Spencer Strider, nobody is going to make more than $22 million in any single season of their deal. When they inherited Chris Sale, the extension they signed him to lowered his salary to $22 million for next year. They don't go over that. And so I think you can fit Ha-Seong Kim underneath that limit. I don't think you can fit Willy Adames under that limit. And I don't know if one, what's the condition of Ha-Seong Kim's throwing arm after the shoulder surgery? And two, I think it's shoulder surgery. And
Yep.
two, is somebody else going to outbid you? And so to me, it feels like those are the only two guys where you can argue, yes, they're upgrades over Orlando Arcia. Everybody else is at best the same. You're in the same boat that you are now with Orlando Arcia as far as an offensively challenged guy that gives you okay defense.
I love to have Willy Adames on the Braves. I just don't think that it's going to work out money wise.
Right.
I do think Kim is an option. I think out of
Yeah.
all of these options, I think Kim is an option. I don't think he's going to reach that 100 million mark. If you go to Spot Track, they're great when it comes to market values, talking pending free agents. Shout out to them. His current market value right now is estimated at 4 years for about $50 million, an average annual salary of only 12.3 million. I do think that's still a little bit low.
Yeah.
But meet me in the middle between your theory and his. I think we might see a 4 for 60. I think we're closer on a 4 for 60 rather than a
At
4 for
15 million a
100.
year.
Yeah, and I think that would be in the Braves market. He has not been bad. A little preview about talking about the free agencies and how they've hit at Truist Park. He has not been bad at Truist Park. Small sample size, of course. A lot of these can be small sample sizes. This is a park that's only been open for a few years, but he has 13 games in Atlanta, and he has a 1.014 OPS for the Braves. So
Gross.
that alone is a lot nicer knowing that you would replace Orlando Arcia at the plate. I do have concerns about that shoulder as well. And I think that his price tag will be a little lower because of that, because he might not be ready in time for opening day 2025. He's remotely close. They saying he's going to shoot for being ready, but that might mean that you have to go with somebody else as your opening day starting shortstop. But his utility, his versatility across the infield, it
Mhm.
would be huge, Lindsay, because what have the Braves dealt with for a couple seasons now? Injuries. And
Ozzy Always been hurt every year.
being able to move a guy around first, second, third, short. He could play the entire infield. I'm pretty sure you can play the outfield as well. That would be huge. So I do like Kim a little more in this situation if you're going to have to pick between the two of them. But regardless, I don't think signing a shortstop in free agency is the right answer for AA and the Braves.
Yeah, especially because the rest of the guys after those two, and again, I think there'll be a bidding more for Kim. After that, 36-year-old Miguel Rojas, club option for the Dodgers, by the way. 35-year-old Jose Iglesias, a former Met. 31-year-old Paul DeYoung, 31-year-old Kevin Newman, 29-year-old Ahmed Rosario, who got DFA'd by, I think, 2 teams this year. 35-year-old Nick Ahmed, who got DFA'd by, I think, 3 teams this year. 38-year-old Brandon Crawford, 34-year-old Aledmus Diaz, and 32-year-old Tim Anderson, who is washed. So,
Yeah.
not a
To me,
great
it's
free
Kim or
agent market.
bust. It's Kim or bust for me if you're
If
going
you're
to take that route.
if you're going free agents, I think a trade is the best way to go.
Agreed.
Okay. A lot of fans are asking for Bichette just final year of his deal in Toronto. Previously to this year, he's been really good. He batted last 4 seasons 306, 290, 298, 301. I don't know if they're willing to make a trade for Bichette. He's making $17 million next year. And then obviously he'd be a free agent. You would have to sign him to a long-term deal. We know Atlanta can do that. I just don't know if they're going to do it in this situation. If you make a deal with the Blue Jays, it's probably for pitching. Maybe there's a scenario where you can get Jorge Soler, give them a DH that they can play every day and play as well as some pitching prospects. But also remember, this organization does not like Alex Anthopoulos. So he used to work there. He left. They didn't want him to leave. It was a whole thing. I don't know if you're going to see a Bichette deal happen. I want to talk about trading for Nico Hoerner. This
I
is
love that. I love
a
this one.
drum I've been banging for a while. Pros here. He batted 273 last year, had 31 stolen bases, would have led the team, would have led the Atlanta Braves. Because that's the thing we talked about is outside of Michael Harris and Ronald Acuna Jr., there's not really a lot of steals that happen with this team. And unlike some of the other proposals, there's actually a reason for Chicago to trade him. They need power. They need a catcher. They have top prospect Matt Shaw right behind him, almost ready to go. And so many fans, we don't have time for a rant, but so many fans are like, hey, go get Elliot de la Cruz. There's no reason to trade Elliot de la Cruz. Go get Ezekiel Tovar. There's no reason the Rockies are trading Ezekiel Tovar. There's actually a reason they may want to trade Nico Hoerner. Now, there is a little bit of things to not love about the fit of Nico Hoerner. He hasn't played shortstop full time since 2022 because they added Dansby Swanson, remind you. He's been a positive defender every time, but his arm strength this year was towards the bottom of the scale. Granted, that was from shortstop. He had a better, perfectly fine arm strength when he played short, but it's been a few seasons since he played it full time. And he doesn't hit the ball hard. His average exit velocity is like 85.7. His hard hit rate's like 27%. He's very outside of the traditional archetype of what Atlanta looks for, a dude that can hit strikes hard. But I do think if you're looking, and some of this depends on the hitting coach, if you're looking to adjust the approach and get a little more consistent batting average, on base ability, and some team speed, I think Nico Hoerner is a good choice. The question's going to be, what is the compensation that it takes?
Yeah, and that is the big question. I love that pick. Real quick, just going back to the Bichette as well. He only has 1 year left on his contract, as you mentioned. So if you have to make a trade for him, which it will probably take a little bit as well, whether regardless of him being a rental, he is going to be the best shortstop available in the 2026 free agency class. And there's not many good names after him as well. So you're only putting a band-aid on something that would only be for 2025 because he's probably not going to sign an extension. He's definitely not going to sign an extension that you've seen from Braves players. He's going to go ahead and try and get paid because he'll be in his age 29 season heading into free agency. But if you look at the rest of the free agents in 2026, Trevor Story, Tommy Edman, does any of those names sound exciting to you? Not at age 32, 33, 34, at the end of 2026. There's a lot of reasons not to like the Bichette trade unless you just are looking for 2025 and that is it. I like the
Yeah.
Nico
I
Hoerner
would
pick. I think that's a
hang
good
on.
one for sure. Yeah.
On Bichette, I would say you only make that deal if the extension's agreed to. There's no way you make that deal on a 1-year thing. You have to have the
Right.
extension agreed to make that deal. I think that's the caveat there. You don't make a trade for Bichette unless he has already agreed. Once the conversation's worked out with Toronto, you get him on the phone, you negotiate the extension, and it's all done at the same time. If that's not how it works, you can't do it.
Yeah. See, I don't think that you'll get that from a guy like Bichette, who's going to be able to test free agency after being with Toronto for such a long time. Nico Horner, you're only going to have to pay $11.5 million in 2025, $12 million in 2026. He's not an unrestricted free agent until the 2027 season. So that means you have 2 seasons with him. And again, like you mentioned, the Cubs are looking to move on from a guy like him because they have people waiting in the wings. As you mentioned, though, I think it's going to take some interesting pieces to move a guy like Nico Horner, and I think it might cause another problem down the road for the Braves because I think it'll involve a guy like Drake Baldwin.
They've struggled at catcher ever since Contreras left. I do think they're going to ask for Drake Baldwin and some sort of arm. Can you make the
Sure.
deal without Baldwin? I don't know. At the same time, Alex Anthopoulos, again, back to that press conference we had a week and a half ago, has like this team does not believe in young catchers. He
Right.
talked about how much more development is needed for a young catcher because there's so much more that goes into what a catcher does besides just offense, whether it's calling a game, handling a pitching staff, the game planning, the prep. And he's not wrong. But if you look at Atlanta's history, they do not at all value young catchers. They traded away Shea Langoliers, who was a top prospect at catcher in the Matt Olson deal. They traded away William Contreras. A lot of people still think that was a bad move. They just don't value young catchers. Even when Contreras was here, he was primarily the DH'd more than he caught. He made the All-Star team as a DH. Like, it's this team doesn't value young catchers. Do they see Drake Baldwin as a piece of the future? Do they see him as a trade chip? And that's the question I don't really know the answer to. But either way, like, depending on how they feel about him, I feel like you can structure a deal for Nico Horner that can be around him and probably a pitching prospect or two. And maybe you even go and you get a young outfielder back, a promising outfielder. They have extra outfielders up there. Even if Cody Bellinger drops out, they've got too many outfielders. But real quick, we're running out of time. I do want to throw 2 more names to you, too.
Okay.
Geraldo Perdomo of the Arizona Diamondbacks. If they want Jordan Lawler in the lineup, you can't move Ketel Marte. He's at second base. That might be an option. Batted 273 this season. I see him like Nico. He's not crushing the ball, but he's a consistent offensive performer, it feels. And then if you want to go back to the well of the Oakland A's, Max Schumann, starting shortstop this year, doesn't hit very well, but he also doesn't chase. What's worse, a dude like Orlando Arcia that chases and doesn't hit well, or Max Schumann, a dude that doesn't chase and doesn't hit well? What's worse? I don't think it's a huge upgrade, but I think it's at least something to think about because you can probably get him from the A's for nothing.
Yeah, you probably won't have to spend too much for him for sure. Now, that's saying that the A's are willing to move on because they did not make any moves at the trade deadline. So they might have a
True.
different game plan that we've not expected of them for quite some time. I like the Perdomo situation. I think that could be a nice backup plan because when he was healthy on the field this year, he was really good. He did deal with some injuries early this year that
Mhm.
did keep him out of the lineup for quite some time, but he could be another piece that probably would not be too expensive to move. And you know what? The Arizona Diamondbacks need, Lindsay? They need some pitching help.
Atlanta's got tons of arms. No team has spent a larger percentage of their MLB bonus pool on pitching since 2019 than the Atlanta Braves. If anybody has pitching prospects, it's the Atlanta Braves. Because it's the Braves podcast, I can say this. If the Braves call you and offer you a pitcher, maybe you should just hang up. Because it almost never works. Who's the last guy, last pitcher the Braves traded away where you're like, yeah, Atlanta lost this deal? I want to say it was Adam Wainwright. Like, the Braves just don't lose deals when they move pitching prospects.
That's a
So,
pretty good track record. Hey, segue for our episode tomorrow.
yes.
We talked about the Drake Baldwin possibility of trading. I think that relies on how you feel about the future of Sean Murphy.
We will get into that tomorrow. Nice little tease by Christian. In the meantime, if you're watching on audio or listening on audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop a new episode. And until next time, this has been Braves Today.